Let's go a little bit further down the table. I'm actually glad you brought up Stuttgart. I think it's really interesting that they are this high up in the form table. They did drop points this weekend, all three to Gladbach. But I do think that the second half, in the last little stretch, they have been excellent, and there's a reason why they're in that top four contention. But speaking of top four contention, we know Bayern Munich and Leverkusen are in, right? But behind that, then you have Frankfurt. They are 5 points ahead of Leipzig. But Leipzig, Stuttgart, Mainz, Gladbach, Bremen, Freiburg are only separated by 3 points, and you can throw in Wolfsburg and Dortmund into that. That's all the way down to 11th, and it's only 4 points between 4th and 11th. The question that I have here, Stefan, I've been wondering about this all day today, and I looked at the results. Dortmund win, big win for them. We get to talk about Dortmund in a moment, so that's huge. Stuttgart drop points to Gladbach, so Gladbach technically pick up points, right? Union and Leipzig draw 0-0, so a Champions League contender in Leipzig drop points. Freiburg beat Bochum, I guess they're now a Champions League contender. Bremen beat Mainz, so Mainz drop points. And then Wolfsburg and Frankfurt play today, and they both drop points too. So does no one want to finish in the top four? Is it just Bayern and Leverkusen, and the rest is just kind of like a lottery?
It feels like that. It's the second weekend in a row now that Frankfurt, Leipzig, and Stuttgart have all dropped points. Stuttgart obviously have dropped 6 points, over the course of the last 2 weekends, obviously, with back-to-back defeats. I watched this game. It was an interesting match. Not one of huge amount of chances, but it felt like a game in which I thought Gladbach were just a team with a bit more energy about them. Stuttgart have obviously struggled much of the season with the idea of juggling a really grueling Champions League campaign with the kind of demands of the Bundesliga. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, Sebastian Hoeneß has made a few changes after that, heavy defeat against PSG. And it was just a game in which I thought Gladbach just looked like a far more settled, far more, match-fit side. I thought Gladbach did really well. Obviously, Ngumu scored a great goal in the first half. Stuttgart then got right back into the match right after half-time. Technically an own goal, but it was a really impressive kind of 1-2 between Voltemata and Brun Larsen. A really great counter-attack. Again, Voltemata showing what he's really capable of on and off the ball. And then Kleindienst obviously goes on and scores a goal in the last kind of 10 minutes. A goal rather, which, as I was commenting in the group chat at the time with our subscribers, that Angelo Stiller kind of left Ulrich to run into the goal, so the fullback for Gladbach, and then he just kind of squares it to Kleindienst, and Kleindienst scores and does what he does best. But yeah, it was really interesting. I think what we're seeing here is a lot of these kind of big teams, Stuttgart, Leipzig, Frankfurt as well, another team who've really kind of struggled to juggle Europa League football. They obviously lost against Roma. They've obviously already qualified from the group, and Roma had to win that game, so you could argue that it was a match that Frankfurt didn't really have to win. But we're definitely seeing that table kind of squeeze together, because Mainz obviously lost as well. But if you kind of look at teams like Gladbach, Bremen, Wolfsburg to a large extent have only lost one of the last 5 games. Augsburg have won now 3 of the last 5 games, and obviously drew the weekend there against Bbattle. We are seeing a lot of these teams kind of, push up the table, and I guess make up ground on what we thought was a pretty rock solid kind of top 4, top 5. And I've actually pulled together a table of on this really cool website called Transfermarkt, which you should totally check out. If you go to any of the competition pages, you can actually go to tables, and then in that there's an own table, OWN. It's a dodgy translation, which we'll have to fix at some point. I'm not sure what the German term is, but basically what it means is you can tick on and off which clubs you want to put in the table. So you can basically do like a mini league to see how these teams all played against each other. So I did that with Frankfurt, Stuttgart, Dortmund, Leipzig, Freiburg, Mainz, Bremen, Wolfsburg, and Gladbach. So basically the mid-table of the Bundesliga to see how they've all done against each other.
Feature.
Sorry?
I didn't even know we had this feature. I've worked for Transfermarkt for 5 years and I had no clue.
I've been using it for about a decade. It's one of my favorite features. And it's really interesting because basically what it shows is that Frankfurt are top with 19 points, but then you have on 15 points Stuttgart and Dortmund. Then on 13 points, you've got Leipzig and Freiburg. And then on 12, you have Mainz, Bremen, Wolfsburg on 11. And then, interestingly, Gladbach on 9, who only picked up their second win against another mid-table club at the weekend there against Stuttgart. What that says to me is there's only 10 points between those 9 clubs in terms of how much they play against each other. And, obviously Frankfurt are a little bit ahead, which is why they're obviously where they are in the league table. But when it comes to Stuttgart, Dortmund, Leipzig, Freiburg, even Mainz and Bremen, there's really not a huge amount between it. And they're all taking points off each other. There's no clear team in that group who's really kind of, pushing on beyond them. Much to, I'm sure, the frustration of Dortmund fans this season, because they would think that these are the kind of games they should be winning to go on and competing. Of course, Leipzig as well. Leipzig have only won 4 out of 8 games against these kind of mid-table clubs. So yeah, it's really interesting. It's really, really interesting. I think that kind of underlines the fact that these clubs are all taking points off each other. Sometimes they take advantage of other clubs when they kind of drop points after European games, but ultimately, no one's really managing to keep up with Leverkusen and Bayern Munich this season.
Yeah, no, that is, I think, the remarkable thing. Last year, they had Stuttgart snooping around a little bit, right? And as you mentioned, I think they're just too busy they were too busy with the Champions League schedule. Remarkably, they're actually about to ship Walt to start Rennes for 15 million euros, and they're bringing in a new defender. And that is, I think, interesting, and we're going to obviously talk about this when the transfer show comes. I'm just looking at the live ticker here of transfers that are going through and not through. So, while you were talking here, but I think that is fascinating, because we're going to see what these teams are going to do over the next 48 hours ish, or 24 hours, I guess, because transfer window closes a little bit earlier in Germany than it does in the Premier League. And see how these teams are going to react to the situation in this race. Again, Dortmund are going to be very busy, but so are some of the other teams. And yeah, I think, the Stuttgart aspect is fascinating to me, because I do think that their biggest struggle has been the Champions League. I actually suspect that on their current form, even with those last 2 defeats without the Champions League, they'll probably be firmly in the top 4 again, even with those changes that they have made. It's those extra games and it shows, even in this Gladbach game, it shows that they just don't have the energy at times to play the football that Sebastian Hoeneß demands from the side. And, at the end of the day, I actually think that despite all of this, the domestic campaign has still been pretty successful. I think the thing that they have to also deal a little bit with is that in Frankfurt, there's another team that's playing a very successful domestic season. Gladbach are resurgent, right? Bremen are much better. Bremen actually, as we're talking, signing Andre Silva as a striker from RB Leipzig. So these teams are all are thereabouts and busy. And I think at the end of the day, it will come down, now that Stuttgart and Leipzig are kind of freed from their Champions League obligations, I wonder what that will do for those 2 teams. And, Leipzig is another one that fascinates me. I spent 90 minutes watching Leipzig against Union Berlin, and I should have really known better after the first encounter this season that also ended in this fashion. That's 90 minutes I really want back. It was only made better because I was taking care of my son anyways, and he had one of those adorable moments. He's starting to make little noises now, so that made the moment better, Stefan. But if it wasn't for that, that's really 90 minutes I want back, because it was 2 teams that just couldn't score. And that I find remarkable about this Leipzig team right now. They have all this firepower. Javi Simmons is back, and they encounter a team like Union Berlin, and there's 90 minutes of nothing. And that is, I think, there is a certain element, and I can't quite pinpoint it yet, that holds this Leipzig team back with all the talent that they have. But they just don't seem to be capable of stringing together a good run of results and really cement that Champions League place. Because I think in a season like the one that we are having this year, they should probably be up there with Bayern and Leverkusen, and not even worry about whether they can keep Javi Simmons by the end of the season because they have qualified for the Champions League or not. This should be long gone. But for some odd reason, this team is just so very inconsistent and just really struggles with scoring goals against teams that play like Union Berlin.
Yeah, I must admit, I thought when I looked at the kind of fixture card here, I thought this is actually quite a good game for Leipzig because, Union under Stefan Baumgart are kind of they're much more attacking than they were under Svensson before them. So I thought, maybe if Leipzig play their cards right, they can obviously pick off Union and really rack up a decent score here and pick up an important 3 points. I didn't watch this game. I don't know if that's what played out. Yeah, I know. Obviously, I didn't miss much, but it is interesting. Yeah, you're right. I mean, there's an interesting story in Sport Bild on Saturday morning, and I mean, their hit rate in terms of transfer stories isn't great, so you can take them a pinch of salt if you want. But they also have a number of good reporters, so it's always worth keeping an eye on what they're saying. And they had a big story on how Jurgen Klopp now has his feet under the desk and at Red Bull, and is one of his biggest tasks is obviously to go through every club and see if they're performing or underperforming, and that means he's got the microscope out and he's going through Marco Rose's record at Leipzig, and they named a number of kind of potential head coaches. The club could be looking at. Sebastian Hoeneß was one. Oliver Glasner, Crystal Palace was another one. I'm trying to remember who the third one was. I'll quickly check my tweet or my blue sky, if you want, whatever you want to call it, before just so I can remember what the third one was. Bear with me for a second. Here we go. Yeah, so Hoeneß, Oliver Glasner, and Robert Schmidt are the 3 head coaches that they referenced. And they also mentioned that Schaefer, obviously I can't remember if he's a sporting director or head of football, not the head of football or managing director, whatever it is, but he's the guy who's obviously just above Marco Rose, and they said he's also under a degree of pressure. And you know what? It's absolutely fair enough because Leipzig haven't been good enough. I think Rosa deserved a degree of goodwill based on the fact that Leipzig lost a lot of players in the summer. They lost players they weren't expecting to lose. They like to think of themselves as being kind of 2 steps ahead in the transfer window, but I think they were caught off guard by a few players that had end up leaving, and it meant they kind of had to scramble. And much the same in this window as well, to be honest with you. And you can already look ahead to the summer window, and it's looking increasingly likely that Benjamin Sesko will probably end up leaving at some point, because the transfer rumours linking him to the Bundesliga continue. You just kind of have to figure out how much of that has to get baked into your analysis of how well Marco Rose has done at the club and how much you don't. As in, yeah, he's lost a number of players, but the squad he's got left, is that still good enough to be comfortably top 4 or even higher? Should Leipzig be up there with Leverkusen really breathing down Bayern's neck? And
yeah,
I think that's a big question. I think we could spend a whole podcast kind of really debating that and breaking it down. But I don't think it's a coincidence that these stories are beginning to kind of leak from the club, as in saying, not everyone's entirely happy with the job that Marco Rose has done. Because to be honest with you, Manu, I'm struggling to think of the last time that everyone was kind of singing on the same hymn sheet at Leipzig and saying Marco Rose is definitely the head coach to get us to where we want to be. It feels like they always take 1 step forward and 2 steps back. At least that's been the case this season.
Yeah, I mean, I'm struggling with those names that you mentioned. Like, why would Sebastian Hoeneß seems to be linked to every club in German football at the moment. And I do think he'd probably be a good fit there, but he also would be a good fit at Leverkusen should Xabi Alonso move on, which I'm not convinced Alonso is moving on, to be honest with you. I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. And Sebastian Hoeneß, of course, has those links with Bayern Munich, so, there's that as well. Glasner is intriguing. Hoeneß
was at Leipzig as a youth coach as well for Berlin.
Yeah, but I mean, so was everyone.
Yeah, well, it's true.
Everyone in German football has at one point worked for a Red Bull institution. It's just, how it is. Yeah, I don't know. It is interesting. Glasner is obviously also interesting because he also has a Red Bull past, right? And so does Roger Schmidt. He was with Red Bull Salzburg. So yeah, I mean, those names make sense. Roger Schmidt is probably the one that fits this club the best. Very ambitious, and we outlined last week when Dortmund were looking at him, why he didn't go to Dortmund, right? Because he's technically on garden leave and costs a lot of money. I think he's free in the summer, so he could be a good fit there. We'll wait and see. But you're right. I mean, it's telling that Marco Rose no longer gets the benefit of the doubt, right? Despite being a Leipzig boy and being a good fit to the club and all those sort of things, there is doubts now creeping in whether he is the right person to move this project forward. And I mean, of the teams hunting a Champions League spot, they and Dortmund are the ones that need it the most. Stuttgart get in there, that's a bonus. They're the first to admit it. Mainz get in there, that's a bonus. They probably wouldn't even know what to do with the Champions League money. It would confuse them. You could say the same about Gladbach and Bremen, Freiburg. Wolfsburg, of course, if they get in, I mean, that'd be a huge win for Volkswagen. I'm pretty sure they would love to placate the company all across Europe and at the biggest competition. That's a different story entirely. But you really look at Dortmund and Leipzig as the two teams that need to get in. And for Frankfurt, they are a team that have been kind of knocking on that door. They qualified for the Champions League by winning the Europa League a few years ago, right? But you really sense that they are a team that is sooner or later going to be a top 4 team simply because of where they are in Germany, the size of the club, the finances that they have accumulated over the years by very good management, the ability to sell players for lots of money and still being very competitive. They feel like they're knocking on that door. Actually, they feel like they could be what Dortmund always hoped to be in some ways. So, but it is kind of like for Leipzig, this is a must. And for the other team, that Champions League qualification is a must. And, after this match day, they're still 11th, but it's only 4 points. I think Dortmund are one of the big winners of this match day.